In this example, I want to go ahead and take a look at SwiftUI for the first time. And specifically within SwiftUI, I want to look at how do we build this application that I have a screenshot of on my screen. So a couple of things that are going on here is that we have two different color swatches. And the idea is that we'll randomly generate the first color swatch using an RGB value. So we'll randomly generate that. And then the second color swatch, we will try to match against the first. So it's kind of like a game. And we're going to start it out with an initial value, and we're going to be able to change those RGB values and subsequently the corresponding color for that second color swatch. And then lastly, what will happen is as we adjust those sliders, we're going to get closer and closer to matching the first color. We are going to have a button, so that is it a match, is a button that will then check, how close are the RGB values that we're choosing, and are they close to matching the color swatch that was initially generated based on kind of random probability. Okay, so the goal here really is to use this application kind of as a starting point to get into SwiftUI. Okay, so I'm going to leave that screenshot up, and I'll close my file system, and I'm going to go out to Xcode, and I want to create a new Xcode project. Okay, so my new Xcode project is going to be an iOS app, and this dialog right here, when we're choosing our options for our project, is really where we're going to choose whether we're using a storyboard-based application or a SwiftUI-based application. And in this case, we're going to use SwiftUI. And we're going to call our product name Color Matcher or Color Picker, whatever you choose to use. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and save that on my desktop. And I should mention, I'm stealing this demonstration from a website, and I will link to that website when I post this. So there's a tutorial that kind of walks you through this. It's a text-based tutorial, kind of an article that goes along with building this application. So it's a good starting point for SwiftUI, and I'm kind of hijacking that, and I'm putting some video and content along with it. Okay, so here's my SwiftUI application, and I have this content view. And this content view looks very different than any of our storyboards. We still have the launch screen storyboard, but this content view is really what initially gets loaded. And the way we know that this content view gets loaded initially is if I go over to my scene delegate, what happens is we have our root view controller. Our root view is this instance of our content view. So you can see that we're creating an instance of our content view, and then our window is going to use the root view as that content view variable that we're creating on line 22. Okay, so this is the file that is ultimately going to get loaded when our application loads. So a couple of details about what's going on with the screen, because it obviously looks quite a bit different than what a storyboard would look like. I'm going to go ahead and create some screen real estate for us. The first thing we have is kind of our Project Explorer over here on the left, and that doesn't change. We still have Swift files, and we can still manage those files like we traditionally have with our projects. This code looks quite a bit different. So what we have is a content view, which is a subclass of view, and then you'll notice that we have this body with some text in it. And really, this is where we're going to be doing most of our work. Okay, so most of our SwiftUI work is going to come right here on these lines that I have highlighted 4 through 7. It's going to be inside of that view. And then lines 10 through 14 is really a content view preview. So it's creating an instance of a content view. And what's happening is that content view is getting loaded over here in this preview. It's called our canvas. And you'll see that the automatic preview's paused right now. I can resume that, and what we should see is kind of a preview of what our application is going to look like. And at this point, our application is going to look fairly straightforward. It's a text text, kind of a label, if you will, that says hello world, and it's going to get rendered out into our canvas. Okay, so we have that label with hello world. If we change it to have a couple of exclamation points, you'll notice that the preview reloads fairly quickly. What I will say is that this preview window starts to get a little bit annoying as we get deeper and deeper into the application, and a lot of times what will happen is if I'm working on my Swift user interface and I want to see what's happening, a lot of times I want more screen real estate allocated to this file, this content-view.swift. So what I'll do is I'll come up into this editor options, and I can deselect the canvas, and that'll hide it for me. And that'll give me more screen real estate to kind of see the actual code that we're going to execute. Okay, I can also run this through a simulator. So I'm picking iPhone 11. I'm going to go ahead and run it. I'm going to run it through that simulator. And ultimately, it should look exactly the same as the preview. So you'll see that we have that text that's centered in the screen, matches the preview fairly well. Okay, so we are looking to make a user interface that looks like this. Okay, and we have some text, right? So we have some text which says hello world, but we're nowhere close to what we actually have here. And what we have here is a couple of things. So the first thing that we have is just a colored rectangle. Okay, so we have a colored rectangle. Let's go ahead and create that colored rectangle. Okay, so instead of text, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want a rectangle. And that rectangle can have some attributes applied to it. So you'll notice that I have some attributes that I can apply to it. So one of the attributes that you see if I go back over to the preview is that it has rounded corners. Okay, so this rectangle has rounded corners. I don't have to have rounded corners. I can let it just be a rectangle, but it does have rounded corners. So this is where I would apply that. I'd set the corner radius to, I usually use 10 as kind of my default value. Okay, so I have a rectangle with a corner radius, and what I want to do is I want to set the foreground color to, let's use dot blue for the time being. Okay, so now what's going to happen is I'm going to open that canvas editor back up so that we can actually see it. So I'm going to show the canvas. And it's paused, so I'm going to resume it. I'm just going to shrink the preview down a little bit so that it fits in my window. Okay, and you'll notice that I have this rectangle that's blue that's kind of filling up most of my screen other than my safe areas on my window. Okay, and we'll deal with that kind of as we go. The reality, though, is if we go back over to kind of our goal, we have two rectangles right next to each other. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to have a second rectangle. Okay, and you'll notice that what happened is that it actually created two different instances. And the reason why is because I have to have a container for all of this. So the way I'm going to suggest that we do this is that I want two rectangles. This first rectangle, I'm just command clicking. And the command click is going to allow me to embed that either in a horizontal stack or a vertical stack or a Z stack. Okay, so these are huge layout elements within SwiftUI. They're super important. So what an H stack does is it allows me to create a horizontal stack, okay, kind of as the name would imply. A V stack allows me to create a vertical stack, kind of as the name would imply. And a Z stack allows me to layer things on top of each other, kind of like a Z index. So it's that axis, that Z axis kind of in a XY coordinate plane, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and embed those in an H stack. Okay, so you'll see the first rectangle is embedded in an H stack. I'm going to take that second rectangle and also embed it in that same H stack. So that if I'm reading this now, you'd see that I have one H stack, that's my container, and then there's two rectangles. So both of the rectangles being blue, I think it makes sense to have maybe the second rectangle as red. Okay, so that's what our application is right now. Okay, and obviously we're hard coding these values. I don't necessarily want to hard code those values, but for now I think it's okay. We're just kind of working on the screen layout. Okay, then if I go back over to kind of our target application, we have text below each of the rectangles, and it's vertically arranged. So I would suggest that maybe we want to use a V stack to get my rectangle and this text. And then same thing here, I want a V stack for the rectangle and the text. Okay, so I'm going to take that rectangle and I'm going to command click it, and I'm going to say embed that in a V stack. And what that allows me to do is has a rectangle and a text element. And my text element is going to be match this color. And then I want to do the same thing for the other rectangle. So I'm command clicking, I'm embedding that in a V stack. And again, I'm going to have some text. And the way the text is going to work is it's going to be some RGB values. Okay, and the RGB values, the way this is supposed to work is it's supposed to be whatever the value is down in the sliders will then show up here in the RGB label. Okay, so these sliders get adjusted, the RGB label here gets adjusted. Right now I've just tied it to RGB because we're just kind of working on the layout for now. Okay, so now we have our color swatch and our text. We have color swatch and text, and now we have this button that's below it. So I would argue that this button is vertically arranged. So kind of all of this stuff, this horizontal stack, and this button are now going to be in a V stack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that whole H stack and I'm going to command click it and say embed that in a V stack. And the idea there is that I have this H stack, which is all the stuff that we've done up until this point, the two color swatches and the two labels, the two text fields. And what I want to do is below it, I want to have a button. Okay, and the button will allow me a bunch of different options, but what I want to do is I want to use the button to have an action and a label, so the text itself will be fairly straightforward, and the text in this case will be just is it a match? And I screwed up, so you can see my layout. I can easily see that I screwed up here. And the reason I say that is because I have my color swatches and then I embedded this button in that horizontal stack. I don't really want it in the horizontal stack. I want the horizontal stack as kind of its own thing. And then outside of the horizontal stack, I want my button so that it's stacked vertically. And again, that's to match kind of my goal here, which is to have it stacked vertically. Okay. So now we have this button, and the button's not doing anything at this point, but it's there for the layout. And then what I want to do is I want to have these three sliders. So the three sliders are going to be in their own vertical stack. So I'll have a slider for the red color, a slider for the green color, and a slider for the blue color. So I'm going to go ahead and have another VStack. And in each VStack, I'm going to have a slider. And the value, I'm just going to hard code right now to 127. And I don't know if it likes that value. Cannot convert to expected argument binding. Okay, so what I want to do is, this is ultimately going to be a user-defined value. So as the user's choosing that value, we're going to change the value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some instance variables that are going to be tied to these sliders. Okay, so we have a struct that's kind of backing this view. So you'll see it's a struct. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have some backing variables. I'm going to have 3 backing variables for the RGB values that should go in those sliders. And as those RGB values change, the idea would be that the label would change, and then also the color swatch would change accordingly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a variable called rGuess or red guess, which is going to be a double. And then I'll have another variable, green guess, which will also be a double. And then blue guess, which will also be a double. Okay, so those are my 3 instance variables. And what I want to do is I want that variable, these variables, to be updated as the user changes those sliders. So what I can do is I can say that those are state variables. And because they'd be state variables, what would happen is I can basically say, as the user interface is getting updated, these variables are also getting updated. So these variables are directly tied to these sliders. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say that these are state variables. Okay, so those 3 are state variables. And because I want them to be updated as the user updates the slider, I can create a binding variable by using the value of, in this case, the first slider is going to be my red guess. And you'll notice I use the $sign here, and that's to indicate that it's a binding variable. Okay, so I want that slider for my red guess, I want the slider for my green guess, and I want the slider for my blue guess. Okay, and then we can try again. And it still doesn't like the color picker. And we got a couple of issues going on. Because we have these variables now, these instance variables, the red guess, green guess, and blue guess, when we create an instance of this content view, we have to supply those values. So you'll notice that I have the missing arguments for that parameter. It's kind of hard to see with the preview running, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide that preview. So it's missing the parameters for the red guess, green guess, blue guess. So I'm going to go ahead and create a content view where I'm filling in those values. So I'm going to use 127, 127, and 127. Okay, so I'm creating an instance of that content view. I'm also going to need this if I were to start my application. So this generates the preview in the canvas, but as we talked about kind of at the beginning of this video, is if I go to the scene delegate, that's also going to come into play on line 22. So I create that instance of a content view, and I have to initialize the red guess, green guess, and blue guess. Okay, so now that I have that, I should be able to go back and I can look at my canvas, and if I resume things, now it looks like it was successfully built, and now I'm expecting to see my sliders once this preview actually renders, and for some reason I'm not seeing the sliders. There are the sliders. Okay, so now I would argue that if I go back and look at what we're trying to match, is we're going to have a label here at 0 and another label at 255, and same thing here, another label and another label. So at each end of the slider, we're going to have a label that's color coordinated to the red value, the green value, the blue value. So what's going on here is this slider, I want to embed that in an H stack. And the idea is that I'd have text, which is 0, and then I would have text, which is 255. And then I'd do the same thing for the next slider. And then for the final slider, I'm going to go ahead and command click and embed that in an H stack where we have the text starting at 0 and going to 255. Okay, and you'll notice what's happening is all of the text is black right now because that's the default text color. What I want to do is I want to change that text color. So I want to change the first text's foreground color to red, and the second text with 255 to red. I want to do the same thing for the second slider, but I want to change the foreground color to green in this case. So changing the foreground color to green. And then lastly, I want to change the foreground color to blue. Okay, so now we have our matching kind of look and feel that we wanted. You'll notice that we're going pretty close to the edge in our preview window, and that'll also show up in the application. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some default padding so that it doesn't look scrunched to the left and right side of the window. So the way I'm going to do that is for each H stack that I have these sliders, I'm going to go ahead and add some padding. Okay, so now my sliders look better. I'd argue that we also probably need to do that for our color swatches. So we have our color swatches, and what I want to do is I just want to do that on the entire H stack, so I'm going to go ahead and add padding. Okay, so I think that looks better. And at this point, I think we're pretty close to what our preview looked like. So we have our two color swatches, and you're seeing a border around my color swatches right now, and that's because that's where I'm working, is I'm working on that horizontal stack that has the color swatches embedded in them. So in my source code file, I'm working with that H stack, so it's reflecting the fact that I'm working with that H stack by putting a border around it. But if I were to click elsewhere, you'll notice that the border is just changing. I'm able to run it, and then we can do a better comparison probably. Okay, compared to what our initial application design was. So we have our two color swatches, match this color. The RGB values we don't have quite right, and then we're not aligned in the slider. Okay, so we're not aligned in the slider, and then our label is not necessarily correct. Okay, so we want to do a couple of things. What I want to do first is I actually want to change it so that as this slider is getting updated, I want these RGB values to get updated. So I want to show what the R value is, the G value, and the B value. So I want to be able to change that accordingly. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is in that label where I have RGB right now, which is right here, I'm going to say R colon, and then the corresponding value that I want is this state variable red guess. So I want to use this escape character red guess. So I'm just going to escape it to output it. And then I want to do the same thing for the G value. So colon, green guess. And then the blue for the blue guess. And you'll notice I'm not using the $sign here. And the reason why is these values are non-updatable since they're embedded inside of a label. So they're not necessarily state variables where as I update the user interface state, these variables should get updated. Like this is literally just echoing out those values. Okay, and you'll notice that that's what we're getting there for those corresponding values. And what I want to do now is I don't like the decimal places that are there. So I want to get rid of those decimal places. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to convert the R guess. So I'm going to convert the R guess to an integer. So I'm just going to take that R guess and say I want an integer. And then same thing for the green guess. And same thing for the blue guess. Okay, so I'm converting those to integers. And here's what's happening. And this is kind of an unfortunate side effect of these sliders. The way the sliders work is the values range from 0 to 1. So really what I need to do is I want to initialize these. So typically if I wanted a gray color for my guess, it'd be 127, 127, 127 on an RGB color scale from 0 to 255. Instead, what I want is 127, 127, 127, but the way I get there is a little bit different. And what I mean by that is typically what will happen is my R guess is half. So meaning it's going to be right in the middle of this slider. Same thing for the green guess and same thing for the blue guess. Okay, and it's saying, hey, there's a problem, and it wants me to put that 0 in front of it so that it's a double. Okay, and now you'll notice that I'm right in the center of that slider. Okay, so what I really need to do is, now you'll notice that my RGB values are 0, 0, 0. What I really want to do is I want to get my RGB values. The way the RGB values are going to work is it's the red guess times 255. And I want to convert that over to an integer. And now you'll notice the red guess is 127. And then the green guess is times 255. Converted over to an integer, and the blue guess, same thing, times 255 converted over to an integer. And it looks like I'm running out of space, and I don't know that I have a good way of fixing that I want to show right now. And all I'm doing now is just kind of launching it so we can see that it's going to word wrap. And the reason you'll notice it's not matching the 127, 127, 127 right now. The reason that's happening is because there's two separate things going on. We have the preview, where we created an instance of a content view, and then we had the scene delegate, where we were creating an instance of our content view, and we never updated the scene delegate to reflect the fact that we want different values for the red guess, the green guess, and the blue guess. So this scene delegate still had 127 here, and it really needs to just be 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. Okay, so now as we run it, you'll see that we have kind of the corresponding values that we're expecting. And you'll also notice that we don't have that word wrap. So I just wanted to point out that the canvas does not necessarily match 100% with what's going on in the actual application. The other thing, I guess it's probably a good point to kind of point this out. If I rotate this device, you'll notice that SwiftUI automatically handles device orientation for me. Okay, so this application looks very reasonable in horizontal or in landscape mode, just like it does in portrait mode. Okay, so SwiftUI is going to take care of that for us, which is nice. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and resume this, resume my preview, and we look fairly reasonable there. And now I want to make the change so that this color is not hard-coded to red, but it's going to be matching what the user selected in the slider values. Okay, and that's fairly easy. So the way we're going to do that is we know that we have our first rectangle, which we hard-coded to blue, and then our second rectangle, which is going to be our guess. And as we adjust these sliders to match this color, we want to adjust the RGB values, but we also want to update our color swatch so we can kind of see what's going on. And right now we have the foreground color set to red. I no longer want to use that hard-coded constant of red. What I want to do is I want to create a color. And it's really hard to see with the canvas up, so I'm going to go ahead and hide the canvas. Okay, and I'm creating a rectangle. The foreground color is going to be a color. And a color takes a couple of different parameters, which is the red value. So the red value that we want is our red guess. And then it also takes a green value, which is going to be our green guess. And then it takes a third parameter, which is the blue, which will be our blue guess. And then lastly, it takes an opacity, which we're just going to set to 1.0. Okay, so we're generating a color based on the RGB values that have been selected within our sliders. Okay, so if we go ahead and run this, you'll notice it's becoming more red. You can see how the RGB values are getting updated as the slider's changing because we're using that state variable. Okay, so our color swatch is getting updated as the slider's getting updated. Okay, based on the selection that we have. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to do the same thing for this other rectangle, and we're trying to make a game out of this. So instead of hard coding this always to blue, what we want to do is we want to have kind of an initial target. So we're going to have a red initial target, a green initial target, and blue initial target to generate kind of our target color, which is the color that we're supposed to be guessing. So we're supposed to be matching this color. This is an auto-generated color based on RGB values. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a variable. So these will be constants, I guess. The red target be equal to double.random, and then the range that we want is 0 to less than 1. And then we'll do the same thing for green and same thing for blue. So we'll have the green target and the blue target. And the idea there is that once we have those values, instead of hard coding our initial color swatch to blue, we should be able to start with a color where we're specifying the red, green, blue of the color. So we'll specify the red being red target, the green being the green target, and the blue being the blue target. Okay, so now if we go ahead and run this, both of our color swatches are going to be dynamically determined. So we randomly chose this green color, and now if we want to match that green color, we need more green, and you can see how we're getting close to the target, and we can change it so that we're a little closer or a little farther away, and we might have to adjust the blues. Okay, and that looks fairly close to me, and I don't know how close it actually is. But then the idea is that I've determined, like just visually, I'm looking at the two colors, I'm saying, yep, that's pretty close to a match. I want to be able to click on this button, is it a match, and determine how close those colors are to matching. Okay? So what I want to do is, really I'm focused on this button. Okay, so the button right now has an action, and the action is right here in code. So I'm going to go ahead and all I'm going to do right now is print button clicked. And what that'll do is it'll output that button click action to our console. So you'll see that we have that button that is now wired up in code. You'll see that we're getting that button clicked action. So the action is getting triggered. It's a closure. Okay, and what we want to do is we actually want to show an alert. So really what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a variable that tells me whether the alert is visible or not visible. So I'm going to have a variable called show alert, which is going to be equal to false by default. And when the user clicks on the button, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that that show alert should now become true. And the idea there, cannot assign property, self is immutable. Why is self immutable? Yeah, I think I have to make this a state variable as well. And at that point, I can say show alert. And I'm still going to use the self.showAlert. I can assign it to true. And because it's a state variable, I can make the change. And then what I want to do is, right now I just have this generic button. It has an action, and all I'm doing is flipping that Boolean switch from false to true, so that now we're showing the alert, and we have a label on the button. But really what I want to do is I want to make this an alert button, and the way I'm going to make it an alert button is I'm going to, at the end of the button, I'm going to say that this is an alert button, and the alert that I want is this one where it says, is it presented and what's the content? And is presented is going to come from the fact that I'm looking at that show alert. And then the content will be so I'll have let me do this. Oops. I want to do an alert, and the way I want to do the alert is I want to show is presented, and then all of this stuff will go away, and what'll come is that closure, and the closure will be an alert, and it should have a title and a message. And I don't know that I want a dismiss button. I think I just want a title and a message. So the title that I want is your score. The message that I want is some kind of text. And I'm just putting this value here for now. And then I don't actually want this dismiss button. I just want this alert. And I think I'm okay there. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and run this. And when I do is it a match, I get your score, I get this dash, and then an OK. And the OK will automatically dismiss that alert. Okay, and our score, there's a couple of ways to compute the score, but basically we want to determine how much the RGB values are off from kind of our target. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to have a function called compute score. So outside of the body, I'm going to have a function called compute score. And I'm not going to have any incoming parameters, but I will return an int. And what I want to do for the function body is I want to take the difference in the R values, or the red values, so the red difference. So the target minus the guess. And then I want to do the same thing for the green difference. And same thing for the blue difference. And I'm going to assume that my score is initially 100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the difference and I'm going to sum them up. And the way I want to do this is I'm going to use what's the absolute value function? I'm forgetting what the absolute value function is, because we could be too high and our guess could be too high and then we're off by a little bit. But essentially what I want to do is I want to return 100 minus the sum of all of the differences. So the red diff plus the green diff plus the blue diff. Okay, and this isn't going to be necessarily 100.0. Can I? Well, I want an integer. And the targets are doubles. So that's kind of annoying. What I want to do then is I just want to convert all of this to an integer. And that'll be my score. And honestly, this compute score, I really need to do an absolute value calculation. So I'm just going out to Google quick. I haven't done it in a while. So Swift absolute value. So it looks like it's just ABS. Okay, so what I want to do is ABS, and then ABS, and ABS. So I'm getting the absolute value, and then using that as my difference, and that's what I'm going to return when I compute the score. So it's out of 100. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to use that in my alert so that my text is not, it's going to be that value that comes back from compute score. So the way I'm going to get that is I want to escape and then I want to call that function compute score in the escape. Okay, so if I run this now, ideally I'm going to get a score. So I know that this isn't even close, and I'm getting a score of 99. I'm not sure why I'm getting a score of 99. Like, that seems awfully good. Seems very close to 100. And really, I think what's happening is the differences are getting to be huge, and I'd have to do some logging here to figure out what the score is. And ultimately, the way I handled this, so at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I kind of hijacked this from a website where there was an article kind of describing how this all works, and they have a function in there to compute the scores. So they take, the way they're computing the score is they're taking the red guess minus the red target, and that's the difference. And then they do the same thing for the green guess minus the green target. And same thing for the blue, so the blue guess minus the blue target. And the way they get the total difference is they use a variable called diff, and that's equal to the square root of the R diff, the red diff, times the red diff, plus the green diff times the green diff, plus the blue diff times the blue diff. Okay, and then what they're returning is 1 minus the difference times 100 plus 0.5. So they're returning the integer representation of 1 minus the difference times 100 plus 0.05 plus 0.5. Okay, so we're getting that score, and again, this is kind of hacked together. You can kind of figure out the math on your own. Again, I'm stealing this from a website that I will link to when I post the video. But if I run this now I should get kind of a more accurate score. So I have my application. I know that my colors are not matching at all, and you'll see that my score is 41. So this is more yellow and less red. So I'm going to up the green and the blue. I don't even know how I'd get that color. And I don't think I'm getting closer. That's a pretty tough one to match. I guess there is some red in it. So we're getting closer, maybe. Okay, so I initially was at 41, and now I'm at 66. Still not close. But I'm going to play around with these sliders to get closer and closer to that corresponding value. And then I can check, is it a match? And I get my score back again. Okay, and the idea is that we're not necessarily building this game. It's kind of a cool example of a game, and it's fairly intuitive. But more so, we're focusing on, like, how do I use these components within SwiftUI? So how do I use these layout components, like the V stack and the H stack? And then within those, we are using rectangles, we're using text, we're using buttons, but ultimately